Okay, this thing's on. Cool. So I'm going to talk about religion, um, and I'll just play this game in the background, and hopefully I've got the volume settings alright, so that you can hear me, but you can still hear the game in the background or whatever. I have to choose a map. Okay, so sure. What I wanted to talk about was this is harder than I thought, to talk and do stuff at the same time. First question is about how is it that people come to be religious and then or come to not be religious? I guess that I'm going to talk a bit about the origins of some religions and why some of them have spread or whatever, and why some people have gone out of them, and then where we are today. So, Judaism and Christianity was started slightly differently, because Judaism was, God chose his people. He said, all right, this is Abraham and his descendants, and these are going to be the Jewish people. And then I don't really know a lot about Judaism, but I think one of the things is that if you're not Jewish, if you're not part of those people, then if you do find that you believe in their God, you don't necessarily have to become a Jew, but rather just practice a righteous life. I'm not sure if that's true. That's what I have heard. That Jews are not really, I guess you'd call it evangelical. And Christianity is a bit different because it was designed to be a religion for everybody, and it was we started with a particular historical event, a particular person. So Jesus came at a certain time and spoke to certain people, but then that message wasn't confined for them alone, nor was whatever he did for them. Rather, that was just the start of something where they were passing on what they'd seen and heard, and what he'd done for them, and so on to other people. So pretty much whoever did accept it then became a Christian. And so this religion was spread by people. It's basically, but you get the idea anyway. And that's why you're more likely for a Christian to talk to you about becoming Christian than for a Jew to talk to you about becoming Jewish. I don't really know a lot about Islam. Sometimes I get kind of conflicting messages about it, where sometimes it seems like the sort of religion where there's God's chosen people. For example, they refer to one of the descendants of Abraham who the Jewish line didn't end up going through. I think it was Esau, and saying that they're his descendants. But then, on the other hand, they have the Prophet Muhammad, who spoke to God and then brought that message on. So the same kind of thing as we said with Jesus, where we've got a message that's being spread, and whoever accepts it then joins the religion. Because when you hear about some of the scarier Muslims, not to be stereotypical, but the kind of the terrorist types, sometimes they say, oh, well, we're going to kill all the people who aren't Muslims or make them the slaves of Muslims. So it's like, well, what if people decide to become Muslims? Then do they get to be part of the group which has the slaves, or have they still got to be the slaves? Because it's like, if you're not Muslim yet, can you change your mind? But anyway, I don't know how many Muslims think along those lines of this kind of superiority of Islam. It's like, you would think that their goal would be that the ultimate goal would be to get everybody to become Muslim. And sure, one of the ways of doing that would be to kill anybody who doesn't agree to become Muslim, like, taking things to the extreme. But then why would you have an extra category of than people who are the slaves of Muslims. Like, and I wonder if anyone would actually choose that as opposed to the other option of either dying or becoming Muslim. Well, I don't know. Anyway, I spoke about them too long already. So that's the start, and that kind of explains why people of some religions will talk about their religion a lot more. And they've got something, but they were only given it by someone else. So in my case, I've been Catholic my whole life, and I got it from my parents, in the sense that, well, they were Catholic, and then they told me about what they knew. And it was not like they had to give me something specific. Like, sure, I was baptized when I was a child, although if somebody wants to become Catholic, like RCIA, which is Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults, is not exclusive. It's basically just trying to make sure that you understand what you're getting into before you join. But as long as you do understand, well, anybody can join. So the idea is that it's not as if I needed a special invitation to become a Christian, but rather I'm just talking about where did I first hear about it from, who taught me about Christianity, so that I would believe in it, for example. And I mean, yeah, if you learn these kinds of things as a child, it shapes the way that you see other things, and it becomes a more natural fit to your mind, as opposed to somebody who becomes Christian later in life. Or if it was the other way around, somebody who was raised Christian and then became an atheist, again, they might find themselves at first struggling, trying to think about things the same way that their friends who were atheists for their whole life would think about things. And not that many people do convert during their lifetimes, compared to the number of people who are born into or die into a religion. There's not necessarily a specific reason for that. I guess, I mean, most people just don't like change, but when we think about religion and discrimination, just to get off the topic for a bit, it's, in some ways, religion is kind of like your race, in the sense of, I didn't ask to be born Lebanese or so on, so it's not really fair for somebody to discriminate against me for being Lebanese. And in the same way, like, because religion is more important to people than their country, it's a pretty big deal for some people. And so it's like, if you had to choose between the two, it's like you would say, I can't change my religion. It would be like asking me to change the color of my skin. Even though you technically can change religions, most people don't. So that was just something I was thinking of. But let me try and get back on track about how people come to be religious in the first place, or come to leave it. And people talk about it. So, yeah, there's definitely, we've got to respect the fact that people can learn about religion. And the reason why that's important to me is because I can say, well, I know some people who are religious, but I know some people who aren't. And I don't have to say, well, those people will never be religious. Maybe they will become religious, And as I said before, the same as, well, maybe some of the people who are now might decide not to be. I wouldn't like that personally, but I'm just saying that people can change their minds about things depending on what they think. So just a bit more sort of history. I guess I don't know exactly when the time they call the Enlightenment was, but I guess it's related to the Renaissance in Europe. And, we developed a lot more ideas about art, about science. I know Isaac Newton I think he was in the 1600s, and, he was the first person, in a way, to really officially be recognized as using the scientific method. And so and he discovered lots of stuff, some crazy stuff, but like he stuck a piece of wood in his eye and things like that. But I'm saying that because a lot of people think that time is the birth of science, and the idea is, well, did this affect whether or not people wanted to be religious? Because we might have said that in the past, maybe people used religion as a way of explaining things they didn't understand scientifically, or whatever. This is what like guys like Dawkins claim, that that's pretty much religion's only job, which is not the case. All right, and I mean, I guess he's in a sense proven wrong by the fact that there are so many people who are still religious, despite the fact that a lot of us do believe in these results of science. The laws of physics we pretty much take for granted. It's kind of hard not to if you use a mobile phone. Your GPS uses relativity. You can say, I don't believe it, but then you don't believe your phone works. But I was talking about that because the Enlightenment didn't really lead to a huge rise in atheism, but we can say that maybe it changed the culture of people who, previously might have had religion as being a bigger part of their life, and later became what we might call cultural Christians, where it's like, well, we kind of more go through the motions, but maybe we're not as spiritual or don't believe it as strongly. And you definitely see, though, that a lot of the morals of Christianity, for example, when you think about the culture of the 1950s in America or the West in general, that a lot of those values were tied to Christian beliefs. So it's like, even if people weren't as strongly religious, they still acted in a pretty similar way as if they were strongly religious. So the culture was still religious. And so the change in the culture in the 60s, I mean, that's not necessarily inevitable, because if we had the Renaissance and the Enlightenment so many years before that, then there's no particular reason why cultural Christianity couldn't have stuck around for even longer. Some people, when they talk about changes in the church, that started in the 1800s, that was part of why maybe the church was becoming less popular or whatever. I don't know, it's kind of internal stuff that I don't really know the details of, but it's like, well, that was going on for 100 years before the sexual revolution of the 60s and things like that. So it's hard to really say what was the trigger for these people switching from being cultural Christians, and not all of them were. There are still obviously a lot of people who took the religion quite seriously. We still have saints, in every century and so on. But this kind of shift that people were just going to say, look, I'm just not religious anymore. It's like, well, where did that come from? But the shift that is more interesting to me is a more recent shift. It's like, okay, so you have people who became what they call nuns, no religion, after having culturally religious parents. Then people might say, well, if my parents don't really care about it and they just go through the motions, then maybe I won't do it at all. But then you've got to ask, what happens when you have those people, the new nuns, who have children of their own? And so these people are not atheists because they were raised by cultural Christians. They're atheists because they've just never known anything different. And I think that people don't really know a lot about religion, and that's part of why I decided to start talking through this series. So it's not a complete ad-lib. I did have some ideas about what I wanted to talk about, but it has been quite difficult to play and talk at the same time. I'm glad I chose to put the game on easy. So, although the AI is doing most of the work anyway. So one thing I was going to say was that, what do I mean that people don't really know a lot about religion, and then therefore they're not interested in it? Oh, when you like something, you're more likely to know about it than when you don't like something. Like if because your interests, you pay more attention to it, and so you can't expect people to be an expert on stuff they don't even care about. But there's different kinds of not liking. So if you don't like something but you've never even tried it, it's not really that you don't like it then. It's not that you dislike it, it's just that you're not interested in knowing about it. Whereas if you have tried something before and then you found that you didn't like it, well then it's different. That's kind of like an informed dislike. So we could give an example of someone who says they don't like wine, but they drank a Riesling once and then they never tried any other kind of wine. It's like, well, they don't know that there isn't some kind of wine out there that they like. It's just that they say, well, yeah, but why should I care? What's so important about wine? Which is a fair point, but I'm just saying that's a different kind of dislike than, say, somebody who used to drink it regularly and then just went off the taste. They would have a much better idea of what they don't like. And so this is why I think that maybe this generation, these people who are in their 30s and 40s who had religious parents but decided not to be religious themselves, they have some ideas about what they don't like about religion to say, well, look, I don't want to be religious because I've already seen enough of it through having religious parents. And it doesn't mean they might not change their minds in the future, but I just feel like it's hard to talk to those sort of people if you compare to the job that the early Christians had when a lot of people hadn't even heard about Jesus, or they'd only heard of him tangentially, secondhand information, and here they meet an actual Christian who's saying, hey, this religion is open to you, basically. It's inclusive, it's open to everyone. So, I was like, oh, that's interesting, I haven't really heard about this, maybe I should check it out. Because if you're trying to talk to somebody who's had religious parents and already decided, look, I'm sick of this stuff, it's like, how are you going to overcome the dislike that they had before to say, maybe you should give it a second chance? So the question is, how much or how little do people know about religion then? Because some people might say, well, I hear about it in the news, and I know about it through politics. I know if I'm an American, I might know that a lot of Christians tend to be Republican and a lot of atheists tend to be Democrats, although that's not a perfect correlation. There's definitely a trend there. Or, they might say, oh, I know some religious people, like particularly people high up in religion, like the Pope or Joel Austin or something like that, famous religious people. They say, well, I don't like Joel Austin, so I don't like religion or whatever. But that's not really knowing about religion. It's kind of like saying, well, I know who Gordon Ramsay is, and if I don't like his TV show, then that means I'm not interested in food. And that would be a silly thing to say, because, of course there's more to food than the guy who happens to be on a TV show about food at the present moment. I guess that's one thing I'm trying to say about religion, is that it's timeless. The people in this particular time and particular place, Christianity is much older than even the Democratic and Republican parties. So we can't really say that we understand religion just by looking at the present day culture and not kind of looking at a sort of bigger picture of what religion is. Alright, well, I might stop here just to see what kind of comments I get on my first video before I proceed with this, since the game of Vermintide 2 is over now. That wasn't too difficult. And I'll catch you for the next one.